uh, even at this time of evening, all those homeless people on the crossing the streets and on bicycles.
Yeah,
it's hard to see.
Hard to see them. Well, tonight we're going to look at Matthew 27. We got this chapter and the next chapter, and we'll be finished with Matthew. Tonight it's on Jesus' trial, death, and his burial. Let me get the scripture up. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now, it's in the morning, so it's early in the morning, probably 6 o'clock, daybreak, whenever daylight comes. Well, the night before, they'd already had the trial, okay? Said the Sanhedrin had already questioned him and hit him around a little bit, and, So, but they can't have their trial at night. So they had a second trial that was, they got their ducks in a row and got who the witnesses were and what they were going to call him on and all that stuff. And that's what happened. Said in the morning they made everything official. They got everything together. So it's essentially the same as what had happened before, because the night before they'd gone back and forth. Matthew doesn't mention Pilate sending Jesus to Herod. At that time, Herod was in. During the Passover, normally Pontius Pilate is in Caesarea. Okay, he's not in Jerusalem. Jerusalem's a little ways from Caesarea. That's where his home was, or the proctor's home is up there. So he was in town for Jerusalem, and Herod was there also because of the holiday, or the Passover. So he had sent him to Herod, then he comes back to Pilate, and this is they're getting ready to send him to Pilate now as the true what's going to happen. Because even though they wanted him dead, they could not issue a death decree. They couldn't kill anybody on their own. They had no authority to. It said Pilate was in fact appointed prefect or procurator by Tiberius Caesar in AD 26. Prefects governed small troubled areas, and in judicial matters they possessed powers like those of the far more powerful proconsuls and imperial legates. In short, they had the power of life and death. So we see that Herod was the ultimate authority right there. Now, an ancient Jewish scholar named Philo, from Alexandria, described Pilate, said his corruption, his acts of insolence, his rapine, his habit of insulting people, his cruelty, his continual murders of people untried and uncondemned, and his never-ending, gratuitous, and most grievous inhumanity. So a lot of times we feel sorry for Pilate, because at the end he washes his hands. He said, "I find no fault in him," washes his hands. Pilate was just a very cruel man. You don't need to feel sorry for him at all. Because you feel sorry for him because he got caught up in a situation he shouldn't have got caught into. The Sanhedrin brought him before, and he should have stood up to them and said, "No, I'm not going to do anything because this man," he does say, "I don't find any fault against this man." Well, he should have said no right then. But the people was there screaming to kill him, to crucify him, so he went along with what they did. Said Pilate wouldn't be interested in the charge of blasphemy against Jesus because it was a religious matter. Wasn't a concern of Rome. All right? He was only concerned what it meant to Rome. So they had to bring up false accusations that he was going to be king. Well, he tried to tell them, this is not my kingdom. Yes, I'm going to be king, but I'm not going to be a king of this kingdom, not this time, not today.
Not a good killer.
That's right. Let's go to 3 through 10, Brother Epperson.
Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned, and that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the piece of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the 30 silver pieces and said, It is not lawful for them to put them in the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in it, wherever the field is called, the field of blood unto this day. This was fulfilled, that which was spoken by Jeremiah, the prophet, saying, And they took 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed me.
Okay, so when Judas, when he got condemned through in the morning after they had the trial and he was condemned, Judas, he felt bad.
Yeah. Does that mean that that's an emergency?
He did not repent at all. So he went back to the Sanhedrin and he was wanting to give their money back to them. But it was considered blood money then.
So they wouldn't accept it.
So they wouldn't accept it. Even though they took it out of the treasury that they had there and paid him with it, they couldn't put it back in there because they said, yeah, it was tainted. They did not. It said there, it is not lawful to put into the treasury because they are the price of blood. So in order to get rid of it, basically, they bought a small field outside of Jerusalem to bury, and they say foreigners or outsiders or anything. It's really Gentiles, is what one of them talks about, saying that has no money or has nothing, that are kind of wanderers, vagrants that's coming through to bury them. And that's where they buried people. Since he was unrepentant, Judas went and committed suicide. Now you have two different parts. You've got Matthew's part that tells him he committed suicide. He hanged himself on a tree. And then I think it's Luke tells us that he fell down off of a cliff and burst asunder. And he died that way. We don't know exactly what happened to him because we don't have a lot of details. But some of them said, well, he could have been on a tree close to a cliff, and when the body decomposed, it fell off the cliff, and then his blood and all this stuff, all his guts fell out.
Austin would hang himself.
That's what he said. He did not, he was so remorseful over what he did. If he'd been repentant, it may have been something different, but he wasn't repentant. He didn't say that. And it's pretty, if you go back and look at all the different authors, how they viewed Judas, it wasn't a good light. We talked about that last week a little bit. Everybody kind of thinks that, well, because he was wanting Jesus to do something different, trying to make out that Judas wasn't too bad. Whatever it was, Judas was not, because Satan entered into him. Told us that last week. The quotation is actually in Zechariah where he's quoting, but we think it's attributed to Jeremiah. Zechariah just quoting him on it. He didn't say that per se, but that's the quotation that they said. 11 through 14. Do you want to read that for us, Iris?
And Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, Thou sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, Hearest thou not how many things they witnessed against thee? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly.
Okay. The only question that he did answer was one Pilate asked him. He said, Are you the king of the Jews? And he didn't say yes. He said, Thou sayest it. And when the chief priest and everything tried to accuse him and speak up, he wouldn't answer them at all. He was finished with them. So he was just dealing with Pilate at that time. And since they talked about many things, the different witnesses they had telling all this about it, and Pilate marveled that he didn't go back and talk about them, tried to defend himself at all against his accusers. He said he marveled at it greatly. So we see from the previous couple of verses, Judas, in between time, he hanged himself before Jesus even died. That's what it appears if it happens in this order. So he didn't have any defense, no miracle to save his own life. Instead, Jesus gave Pilate the same simple reply he gave to the high priest. This amazed Pilate. He asked, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And Pilate couldn't believe that such a strong, dignified man, as beaten and bloody as he was, would stand silent at these accusations. So that's why the governor, Pilate, he just couldn't understand why Jesus wouldn't speak up.
Well, if you really think about it, it wouldn't have done him any good to say anything anyway. Nobody believed him.
Well, Pilate was the one, and he tells them here in a minute that I've got control of you. I can have you crucified, or I can let you go. That's what. Go ahead and read it, 15 through 18.
Okay.
There at the bottom of the page.
Now at the feast, the governor was wont to release unto people a prisoner whom they would, and they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him.
Okay. Now this is Matthew's take on it. Okay, he's looking and seeing and hearing this. Matthew, as far as we know, wasn't even there. So he's hearing this from either John, most likely John, because he was the one that was there. Peter had already taken off, remember? He went out crying, because he had already denied Christ. I'm not saying he wasn't there. It's not mentioned that he's there.
You don't know how detailed Matthew.
Well, I'm sure he's detailed, but we don't know exactly what he heard.
Right.
If it was just somebody else was telling him after it happened.
Yeah.
We don't know. In Luke, it does tell us he was declared an innocent man. Pilate says, I find no fault in this man. Matthew doesn't talk about it. In another place, in another part of the scripture, his wife Pilate's wife sent him a message and basically said, don't have anything to do with this man. She had had a dream, and the dream was bad as far as what it's going to be for Pilate.
Yeah.
So she tried to get him to do that. It says, we know that the vision of Jesus in her dream made her suffer. Because she says, I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. Charles Spurgeon says, whatever it was, she had suffered repeated painful emotion in the dream, and she awoke startled and amazed. It says it was a remarkable occurrence. She awoke late in the morning, disturbed by the dream. She asked where her husband was, and her attendants told her that he was called away early for his business. The religious leader of Jerusalem sent over a prisoner for judgment. Immediately she asked the messenger to go to her husband with the news of her dream. Spurgeon also said, most dreams we quite forget. A few we mention as remarkable, and only now and then one is impressed upon us so that we remember it for years. Scarcely have any of you had such a dream which made you send a message to a magistrate upon the bench. Now, it seems like every night I have dreams now. I'll wake up and it's a dream and I'm like, wow, that was real kind of intense or whatever it was. A lot of times, for whatever reason, I'm back in school or something else. But then I go back to sleep. In the morning, I can't even hardly remember the dream. I remember, man, I had a dream last night, but I don't know what it was. And that's what he's talking about. We dream, almost everybody dreams. It's just most of us don't remember our dreams. So unless we are startled by it, like this one was, that brought her out of her, sleep, we just kind of go on and forget about it. So it was the time of the Passover, like we said, and one of the things that they had was during the year they would let a prisoner, at the Passover, they let a prisoner go free. Pilate could let one of them go free. So he saw his option here is to get out of this, to try to let the people decide, and hopefully they would see that it was Jesus hadn't done anything, so they'd let him go. They would say, release Jesus. But they didn't. They asked for Barabbas. It said the priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So that's just kind of crazy. It goes on and describes it here a little bit more. Let's see. I missed 19. Okay, there it is. So it says, when he was set down on the judgment seat, Pilate, I just jumped to the page there. His wife sent unto him, saying, have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. So, like I said, I skipped ahead a little bit. Let's go ahead and read the next one, 21 through 23. Brother.
The governor answered and said unto them, whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate said unto them, what shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? They all said unto him, let him be crucified. And the governor said, why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, let him be crucified.
Okay. So the governor, they couldn't reason why they wanted, Jesus to be crucified. What has he done? Now it goes in here and tells, let's see where it was in this. It says they chose Barabbas instead of Jesus. It reflected on the fallen nature of humanity. The name Barabbas sounds very much like son of the Father. They chose a false, violent son of the Father instead of the true son of the Father. Now, in one place, and maybe it's in here or maybe it's another commentary I read, that's why he said Jesus called the Christ, because this was Jesus too, Jesus Barabbas. And That's what one of the commentaries said, that because of that, and Jesus was a common name back then. So it could have very well, that's the way he identified him. So it's kind of like Mike or Joe or Bill or whatever today. So they had to specify who it was, who he wanted to be. And they said, let him be crucified. Now, their crucifixion is the worst of the total way that they could murder somebody. They didn't invent crucifixion. The Romans didn't, but they perfected it, if you want to say it that way.
Is that the often worse than stoning and that was the time?
Yeah, I think so, because we'll talk about it as we get into it here in just a minute. It goes a little further. Let's read 24 and 25, Brother Epperson. Oh, you read Iris?
Me?
Yeah, page 11 there.
When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children.
Okay. So Pilate was trying to dissuade, trying to encourage them to choose Jesus of Nazareth. And when he couldn't, when they did that, he said, well, I'm just going to wash my hands of it. What does that do? That's more of a Jewish custom, to wash your hands before they go into do the priestly functions. One of the things they did was wash their hands. So he may have been doing that just to show them, that, hey, I don't have any cause of it. It's the same way as we do. I don't want to dirty my hands with this. This is on you. And the people cried out, said, okay, it's going to be, his blood is going to be on us and our children, is what they said. Now, it really doesn't matter, because Pilate was still the one that issued the order, even though he tried to get it. He's trying to say, I'm innocent with this just person. But he's not. He's the one in charge. He's the one that only he could give the order to crucify them. Some people, it says here on page 12, strangely, some people in the later Christian periods tried to rehabilitate Pilate, wanting to put all the blame on the Jews. Some even said that Pilate and his wife become Christians. To this day, the Coptic Church ranks both Pilate and his wife as saints. That's how some people see it. It's hard for me to see that way. Okay, so 26. You want to read that for us, Bertha?
On what page?
Bottom of 12.
Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Okay. What's scourging? Whipping. It's where they have what they call the cat of nine tails. It's a stick about this long or so, and on it is long leather straps. And on those straps, on each one of the straps, they put a piece of bone or a rock or a piece of glass or something like that on the ends of those, and they will whip that across it. All those things will stick into it like a nail or something, stick into his back, and then they yank it off. And they do it again and again and again. Okay?
Oh my gosh.
The goal of the scourging was to weaken the victim to a state just short of collapse and death. And said many times the people died before, just of the scourging. Said they had iron balls on them. They would cause deep contusions or bruises. The leather thongs and the sheep bones would cut into the skin and the underneath tissues. Then as the flogging continued, the lacerations would tear into the underlying muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Pain and blood loss generally set the stage for circulatory shock. The extent of blood loss may well have determined how long the victim would survive the cross. And it was so intense. And what would happen as the prisoners would start confessing to their crimes, the soldiers would not hit them as much or as hard. But Jesus said never a word. So he took all the lashings full force. They said his back didn't even look like human. I mean, it was just shredded. Said the severe scourging with its intense pain and appreciable blood loss most probably left Jesus in a pre-shock state. Moreover, hematidrus had rendered his skin particularly tender. The physical and mental abuse meted out by the Jews and Romans, as well as the lack of food, water, and sleep, also contributed to his generally weakened state. Therefore, even before the crucifixion, he was serious or possibly critical in the way he was. Like I said, they didn't, well, we'll go into it here in this one. Let's go to 27. 31 said, Then the soldiers of governor took Jesus into the common hall, gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers, and they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand, and they bowed their knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. They spit upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. And after that they mocked him. They took the robe off of him and put his own raiment on him and led him away to crucify him. So this was all at Pilate's there at the place in the common area where he was being judged. And the soldiers, they took pleasure in this. It was not just 4 or 5 soldiers there. It was a whole platoon that they had there, and they may have taken... When you're whipping somebody like that, that takes a lot out of you. I don't know how they actually did it. What they have shown on television, there's 2 of them whipping them. One on one side and one on the other. So one will hit this side and pull it across, and one will hit this side, and you're chained up like this, usually. So it's just your back. So it said they gathered the whole garrison around. Usually it's only 4 soldiers, but they had the whole garrison around him. It said the soldiers of the governor were auxiliaries, not the Roman legionnaires who would be recruited from non-Jewish inhabitants of the surrounding area and would be recruited from non-Jewish inhabitants of the surrounding areas. So they weren't the hardened Roman legionnaires, but they were just the people that the governor hired for his protection. So that's what it was. It said the detachment is called Spirea. In a full Spirea, there were 600 men. Okay? It's not likely that there were as many as that in Jerusalem at that time. These soldiers were probably Pilate's bodyguard who accompanied him from Caesarea, where his permanent headquarters was. And it's called Praetorium. There is what that's the council hall or the common hall where the justice or courthouse, if you'll say it that way. Jesus was mocked, Hail, King of the Jews. They were acting like they were bowing down to him at the time. One other thing that they do, they said, they stripped him. They stripped him naked. Had nothing on him. One of the things was to humiliate him as much as possible. And then they put that robe on him when they were mocking him. Well, that robe, his back's bloody, and the robe, they settle for a little bit, and the robe gets saturated with blood, and they rip the robe off of him, tears his back open even more, and puts whatever he had on him back on him. Then they put that crown of thorns on him. We saw some of the trees over there that they think they made that crown of thorns out of. The branches, it's big old long, thin branches, and they would weave them around. Those stickers was about long as my finger or more. Sharp, hard, dense. That's probably what they had. And they didn't just put it on his head. They crammed it down. They shoved it on his head. They gave him a reed for his scepter to mock him. And then they took the reed from him and beat him with it. Of course, that's not going to hurt, but that's more making fun of him than anything else. Some of them said they even beat him with, they'd take it, hit it, and their hands was hitting him while they were hitting him with that reed. They spat on him, they took the reed, struck him on the head. So they was mocking him as much as they could as being a royal or a kingly authority. Let's see. There's a lot of information here on this. There is a good, I don't know if I actually have it. When we went into a Bible study downtown, the pastor told us to get this one book, and I think I actually got it. It's a book on, talks about here the crucifixion. It's not called crucifixion here, but the crucifixion of Jesus. And it goes through and tells in great detail the best they know how. Now, one of the things why people don't understand, they have not ever found bodies that were left that have shown this crucifixion. The wrists being pierced, the nails in their feet, and all this stuff. They found one body that had a peg or nail, one of the big nails, in the ankle bone. But it didn't show anything else with it. So they don't know, and that's one of the big kind of where people hold back and don't understand because they don't think the crucifixion actually happened, that they don't have proof of it. Well, the bodies decompose after just a little while, and even 2,000 years later, as they were crucified, when the body decomposed, they take the bones and put them in a little box and put them up somewhere, like they said, put them in a potter's field somewhere else. So they don't really know. Said Spurgeon wondered how Matthew heard of this crown of thorns and the mocking that went along with it. He wonders if it was not one of the soldiers that was later converted and came to faith in Jesus. Our Lord's marred but patient visage preached such a sermon that one, at least, who gazed upon it felt its mysterious power, felt that such patience was more than human, and accepted the thorn-crowned Savior as henceforth his Lord and his King. So, here again, Matthew wrote the story. He may not have actually heard everything. This may have been something one of the soldiers told him what had happened. And what they did, right outside the gate of Jerusalem, where the road went out, people came in and out, that's where they put the crosses. So it's like, here's your warning now. If you're coming here to do bad, to do injustice, or do a crime, that's what's going to happen to you. And most of the time, they would leave the body up there until it basically rotted off. Dogs, birds, everything come and try to bite it off till it just, was gone away. And then they take what would remain down and throw it away. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. It doesn't. Okay, it talks about, we'll talk about the cross. It it said the entire cross was probably on the order of 300 pounds. Now, most men are 150 to 200 pounds. You know, back then, I don't know how big they were, but the cross would have to be pretty stout in order to hold them up. And what we see a lot of times in the movies is that he's carrying the whole cross. They said that's probably not what happened. He probably just carried that crossbar. They put it on his back, tied his hands to it so he couldn't get loose, couldn't get away from it, and he carried that. Just that crossbar, they said, probably weighed 75 pounds. Yeah. Said anywhere from 75 up to 125 pounds. So they went ahead then and they put him on the cross and then raised that bar up so they could put him on there after they attached his hands and everything. So in other scriptures we see that Jesus fell a couple of times in here in 32 through 34, Brother Epperson.
And as they came out, they found the man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they were coming to the place called Golgotha, that is to say, the skull, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall. And when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink.
Okay. As he was going through Jerusalem, now the way they took it from where he was at, it's called the Via Dolorosa, where the stations of the cross, where they think Jesus went. They didn't take him straight across to the quickest way they went. They paraded him through town in order, again, for people to mock him, to show as many people as possible, you don't mess with Rome. You don't mess with them. You don't do all this. So they took him around. We see in other books, he fell several times. So finally they chose a man, Simon of Cyrene. He was visiting Jerusalem because of the Passover. Cyrene is in North Africa. That's almost 800 miles away. So he had a long trip to get there for the Passover time, to be there. And they don't know a lot about Simon, what happened. Some of the history says that maybe afterwards he became a Christian. And there is a Simon that's mentioned, and he had two sons later on. I think it's in Acts. And they think that went on to be great evangelists. And they think that may have been the same Simon. They don't know. Here again, you had Simon Peter, and others. So there could have been more Simon. Simon the leper. So we don't know exactly what happened. Now, when we went there, there's actually two places where people think that was where he was crucified. The one place where most people think he was crucified, you can see we were sitting right here and looking across a little ways away. It wasn't right there, but it was the side of a hill, rock hill. And you could see, they had a picture that they took back in early 1800s, I think, where they call it Gordon's Calvary, where Gordon, he's a British man, he did some exploration and he thinks that's where it was at, because that particular rock, it looks like it has two eyes, looked like two eyes, had like a little nose, and looked like a skull right there in that field. Well, when we looked at it, looked like the nose was gone. He said, well, we've had a lot of weathering and stuff, and part of it's, but you could see the picture back then, and if you went back even further in time, it may have been that looked just like a skull. And there, either in front of it or on top of the hill or wherever, somewhere around there, is where they think that he was crucified. It says Golgotha, which means a place of the skull. So that's where they thought. There's other times too. Now this is outside the city. I mean, not now, but At the time when Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, he was outside the city. Now it's inside the city because the city's grown quite a bit.
Yeah.
But it's still, and then not very far from that is a tomb. And that's where they think Jesus' tomb was, because it tells us a little later on that that's where they took him. They gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. Gall is a sedative, pain numbing. And they wanted to numb the pain so they could keep the murderer, keep the person that was crucified alive longer. They wanted to create as much pain and as much hurt as possible to make it, unbearable for him. And what did Jesus do? He turned away. He did not take the gall. He did not take that sour wine. What is sour wine? Vinegar. I take that every night to help cleanse me out. Take it in the morning, take it in the evening. Apple vinegar. And it's stout. It'll burn you. I take only a teaspoon in a glass of water. The first time I took it, I didn't really see what the mixture was, and I took about a half a cup of water. And I spit that out pretty quick. I didn't linger too long with the burning sensation hit.
When I was first diagnosed with gout many years ago, when they really had medication, I had to do that. I'm like, oh.
What kind of vinegar do you get?
Apple cider
The
vinegar.
real raw?
Yeah, raw vinegar.
Okay.
Yeah. Here it is, On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ. There's the book that was written by Dr. William Edwards. There's a whole bunch through there, and I don't want to read it because it gets gross, but you can read through there that it talks about all the different, on page 20, all the different things. Most of the time, what a person died of was asphyxiation. Because when your hands are up, okay, and your whole weight of your body is up, that's how you breathe in. Your lungs and everything goes up. And you're hanging there. And the only way to breathe is to push yourself up by that nail that's penetrated your ankles. Extreme pain there to get you up so you can take a breath. Because you're always inhaling. You can't exhale. So that's why people, they just give up. They get tired. They can't push themselves up anymore. And they give up. Is what eventually happens. Said not uncommonly, just to get even more gross, insects would light upon and burrow upon the wounds or the eyes and the ears and the nose, and they couldn't do anything about it. Okay? And they leave them on the cross to be devoured by animals, a lot of times, and birds. Said a Roman citizen would not be crucified except by direct order of Caesar. Now we know Paul was killed by Caesar, but he wasn't crucified. Crucifixion was the worst of the worst of the worst, to be crucified. Today we want to be nice, I hate to say it that way, we want to be nice and not hurt somebody when we kill them. Well, that's kind of not the point. Can't have any pain and suffering while they're killing them. They didn't believe in that back in the Roman times. They said you got to make them believe. You don't want to even be cross their paths. And we skipped the one part that is the very first part of 35. Says, and they crucified him. Iris, read on the bottom, page 21, 35 and 37.
And parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And sitting down, they watched him there, and set up over his head his accusation, written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.
Okay. So, again, this is a prophecy that was fulfilled. that they said at the time they would separate his garments, whatever garments he had. So he had nothing on the cross. We always see him with something on the cross. Well, that's just to make it nice for us. But when he was actually up there, all of them, they wanted to intimidate him, they wanted to mock him, they wanted to humiliate him completely. So whatever he had, whatever clothes, he died with nothing. So they would tear his clothes in two and each take the part. And then when he had that robe, the purple robe that he had on, they didn't. They did dice, kind of like what would be for dice, and rolled to see who would get it, because it was a nice robe. It's purple robe, it talks about in one place. So it was something that was worth a lot of money. And then they said over his head, "This is the King of the Jews." What they said, what normally when a prisoner would be crucified, they would write that, whatever his crime was, and they would put it on his neck as he walked to the crucifixion. So this may have been what he did, or whatever it was. Somehow he had that, and then they nailed it to the cross. Either the soldiers had it or whatever. That he was nailed to the cross with that on there. Again, it's that it might be fulfilled. That even in all this sin, pain, and agony, and injustice, God guided all things to his desired fulfillment. It may seem that Jesus had no control over these events, yet the invisible hand of God guided all things so that specific properties were fulfilled. Said in John 19:21, we read that the religious leaders among the Jews objected to this title, the King of the Jews. And they should have put, he called himself the King of the Jews, because they didn't believe it. But Pilate turned around and he told them, "What I have written, I have written." That's what his crime was. That's all he was. I messed up. 38 through 44. You want to read that for us, Bertha?
Then were there two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and the other one on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, "Thou that destroyest the temple, and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise also the chief priests, mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others, and himself and he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God." The thieves also which were crucified with him cast the same in his teeth.
Okay. So we see at this time both of the captors, the other people on each side of him, the robbers, they actually said the same thing. They were mocking him too. People were passing by because they were going in and out of Jerusalem. They were telling them, "Save yourself if you're the Son of God." They were every one of them was mocking him the way it was. Jesus was put in the middle of these two. You know why he's put in the middle? Because he represented that was the worst of those three crimes. They kind of put whoever was the worst there, and then the next, and then the next. So in this, there was three people there. The one in the middle was the one they considered the worst offender. And he was the least offender of any of them. Now we go to 45. Now the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. Now for us, that would be about 6th hour would be from 6 o'clock, so noon till 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
It was dark. It was real dark. It was so dark.
In your face.
It was so dark that they could not, it wasn't like clouds or anything like that. It's almost like an eclipse. But at the time they said there wasn't any, eclipses during that particular time. A natural eclipse. This was during the Passover, so it would have been a full moon during that time. It was always held, so it's impossible that there would be a natural eclipse of the sun at that time. It's the same, similar to the same darkness that fell on Egypt for that time period when Moses, one of the plagues that came upon them. If you go down about the middle of the page, there was contemporary evidence for this unusual darkness. Origen, in the book Contra Coelestius 2:33, and Eusebius in his Chronicles quoted from Phlegon, which was a Roman historian at the time, in which he made mention of an extraordinary solar eclipse, as well as an earthquake about the time of the crucifixion. Said the Roman history wrote, in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was an extraordinary eclipse of the sun at the 6th hour that turned day into dark night, so that the stars in heaven were seen, and there was an earthquake. Now, I've seen several eclipses. I don't see any stars. It's still bright. It gets dim. You can tell it's getting dim, but it got dim enough to where they could see the stars at that time. That's how dark it got. Okay, Brother Epson, 46 through 49.
About the 9th hour, Jesus cried aloud with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani.
Close enough.
That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, this man called for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave it him to drink. The rest said, let it be. Let us see whether Elias will come to save him.
Okay. So they misunderstood Elias and Elijah, or Eloah. It sounds alike, but it's actually one's God. He was calling Eli, Eli, which is God, my God, why else would you say? They thought he was calling for Elijah to come and help him, but that's not what he was calling for. He was calling, why, have you forsaken me? At that particular time, God had turned his back and let all the sins of the world fall upon Christ. And that's what he was feeling right now as Son of God and the Son of Man at that time. They ran and filled a sponge and put it up there, filled it with vinegar, and gave him something to drink. That was the soldiers' wine, what they had, what they carried, is what they said. They gave him some of that to give him, and it said, gave him to drink. But the rest of the people, of course, they said, let us see whether Elias will come. And that has 2 or 3 sermons in itself. We keep on going to page 29 is 50. The 50th verse. Iris, you want to read that?
Page 29 down there.
Yeah.
Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost.
Okay. Now, each one of these, here again, Matthew doesn't record everything he said. The others don't record everything he said. Here he cried with a loud voice. We know from what the others said, what was the last thing he said? It is finished. It is finished. He had completed what God had told him to do, and then he died. And it said he just didn't die. He yielded up his spirit. He gave himself to death. He could have lasted longer, but he gave himself to death. Okay? He yielded up his spirit. Every man since the fall has not been liable to death, but has deserved it, as all has forfeited their lives because of sin. Jesus Christ was born immaculate, and having never sinned, have not forfeited his life, and therefore may be considered as naturally and properly immortal. Augustine said he gave up his life because he willed it. When he willed it, and as he willed it. He did it in his time when he was ready to go. Uh, 51, go on to the next one. Bertha, 51 through 56.
And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurions and the holy and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake, and that those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly this was the Son of God. And many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and John, James and Josh, and the mother of Zacharias,
Zebedee's children. That's James and John's mom. So he gave up the ghost, and when he died, the veil of the temple rim was cut, was split from top. Well, nobody could get it from the top. It was 20 foot tall to the bottom. And what that represents is now he made a way into the Holy of Holies for every one of us. And because of those things that happened, that restoration power that was given off then, many people come up out of the graves. We don't know much about that. Matthew's about the only one that tells us this, that happened. Much like Lazarus, we can guess they all died again sometime. We don't know exactly what happened during that time. But it was enough to weigh upon the people that was seeing, even the centurion said, truly this was the Son of God. The people saw that was representing that if that happened, when an earthquake happens like that, that's scary. I mean, it starts shaking the whole ground. You don't know what's going on. And then go ahead.
That part there, Spurgeon said,
Mm-hmm.
it is not a slight rent through which we may see a little, but
Oh, no.
from the top to the bottom.
Yep.
There is an entrance made for the greatest sinners. If there had been a little small cut through it, the lesser offenders might have crept through. But what an act of abounding mercy is this, that the veil is rent in the midst, and the rent from top to bottom, so the chief sinners may find ample passage.
Mm-hmm. Made it for everybody. Everybody could make way to him.
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Like I said, this whole chapter could be many, many study verses. We could go a long time just with these.
Yeah.
57. When the even was come, okay, and this was from we said from noon to 3, and then from 3 to 6. Ninth hour is 3 to 6, or 6 to, 3 to 6. So the evening was starting to come upon them. When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea, named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. He went to Pilate, begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body be delivered. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out of in the rock, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. And there was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. So we see, it tells us who some of the witnesses were before, the ladies that was there. Okay? There was the two Marys, and then mother of James and Joseph. We don't know exactly who that was, and we know also Zebedee's, which was James and John's sons, their mother, which later on, John tells us his name Salome, was there. And then once they stayed there, Mary, his mother, and Mary Magdalene stayed there until he was truly buried. So they saw, so who do you think Matthew got the story from?
Probably the women.
Probably Mary, his mom, and Mary Magdalene, or Salome, or this other mother of James and Joseph. So we don't know exactly, but Matthew wrote this down. This is what he's telling me. Joseph gave his own tomb, said he was a rich man, and it had to be. And he was also, later on, it tells us that Nicodemus comes and helps him. Not in this book, but in John and Luke, some of those others, Nicodemus comes and helps him. And he said a little later on, several of in Acts, I believe it is, several of the priests became Christians. So in recognizing this, the people are starting to see, and it starts to grow, the church starts to grow after this. Of course, it goes on. We're kind of into Acts now. But Joseph, once he put his body in there, it was basically, they had a little trough. It's about that wide. It's a rock that's in front of it. They hew it out. Just take some stone and hammer and cut it out, nails, and they get that big stone and it rolls down and it falls into place. So one man can't open it up by himself. It usually takes 2 or 3 more rolling that stone back, and then they chalk it up so it won't come back down on them. Because they use those tombs over and over and over. They may have a place in the tomb hewed out for 3 or 4 bodies, but if that's your family cemetery like it is today, Grandma and Grandpa's gone. They were buried there, but now their bones, everything's there, it's just their bones. They take those bones and put them in a little box and put them up on a shelf in that tomb, and then it's ready for Mom and Dad, the next one. And then once they're gone, they put them up there and it's ready for the next one. That's the way they did for a long time. We've seen that as archaeologists have, dug these out. This is the way these tombs were found. It says it was very expensive. That's why it tells us that he was, very rich. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next one. 62. Is that me? I'll go ahead and read it because it's getting close to the end, I think. Yeah, this is the last one. Now the next day that followed, the day of preparation, which is getting ready for the Sabbath, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. So they were going, okay, they had to get him in the grave before Sabbath, the holy Sabbath started. They think this may have been a special holiday. So, and then he rested all that day. So then the next evening, which is the start of their new day, they went and told them that, hey, we need to make sure that this guy doesn't rise after 3 days. So the Sanhedrin said, command therefore the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, he is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. Pause here right for a minute, but you ever known somebody? This wouldn't even, I mean, he said that would happen. That wouldn't even occur to me that somebody would go steal the body just to make it look like that Jesus was taken. That wouldn't even occur to me. Sometimes people jump to the conclusions, and they jump to the far end of the moon, don't they? About what the worst thing that can happen, or what. And I'm like, I can't even, I wouldn't even have thought of that unless you said that.
And you're like, why would they?
Yeah. Anyway, so Pilate told them, ye already says, ye have a watch, go your way, make it as sure as you can. This is the same guys that crucified Jesus. He had given them these people, so go use them, is what he's telling them. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. Now what this is they put a piece of rope on one side of the cave, the top of the stone where the cemetery was, or the grave was, and on the stone that rolled, they put the end of it, and they put 2 big old gobs of wax. And in that wax, they put a seal. That was the Roman seal. And they could tell then, if that door had been opened, that seal would have been broken. And with that too, they were sitting there in guard, watching. Okay? So that's where we leave it to go to next week. Okay? But
I like the deal on the bottom of page 36. Where it said that I wrote that Christian magazine.
Yeah.
Our preacher said in Easter that Jesus just swooned on the cross.
Yeah.
And that disciples nursed him for help. What do you think? Sincerely bewildered. Feature preacher with a cat of 9 tails. With 39 stripes. Nail him to a cross. Hang him in the sun for 6 hours. Run a spear through his heart. Embalm him. Put him in an airless tomb for 36 hours.
See what
happens.
Right? See if you swoon. What they were saying is that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, and that after they got him off the cross and put him in the tomb, and he came back alive. Just he revived. They're saying, you do all that to somebody and see if they're going to live. That's not what happened. So. All right, I appreciate everybody coming out.
Well, thank you for what you do to get these lessons prepared.
Well, it's fun. I learn as much as you guys do, I think.
Yeah, I ask questions that might sound silly, but